Halls are interesting places. If it's a good hall, whoever designed it knows that we have two ears, not one measuring microphone. That doesn't tell you anything because trumpets can project forward, they bounce off of rear walls, woodwinds project upwards, they kind of spread out. Strings have a way of having lower notes of instruments going over the musician's shoulders and the higher notes coming forward. So we have directionality. Uh, and what we hear in a hall is different parts of the hall responding to that. So then to make a recording, I want to capture that same sense, that same feel that you were there. And you are there doesn't mean necessarily sitting in what might be the best seat in the house. It can be from the conductor's standpoint, and sometimes that's quite valid. There are many compositions written that that's where you're supposed to be. Other times you're out in the audience and you're getting the concert hall experience. And then there are a few compositions like the one I just recorded where you get the perspective from the musicians. I mean, jazz is like that. The best way to have jazz is like the musicians are doing it. So those are very, very different microphone techniques to pull off. My goal is to try to make something that you can be a serious listener and pull out that experience. There are other ways. I mean, an awful lot of stuff is made as a social lubricant. In other words, you're doing something, a party or whatever, and the music's in the background, or you're driving the car and the road noise is there, and you're doing that. So that's a different perspective. Headphones, they're different. They're different than speakers, and the mixes ideally want to be different for both, and I think the future audio is going to be that way. In other words, whatever you plug into the plug is going to identify the way you're listening to the program, and it's going to adjust what feed comes back to you that's, in this case, optimized for the device you're experiencing. So anyway, that's all from the user standpoint. Now we're on stage. And so the setup that I use, I've lived with it for many years, starts off with a group of microphones along the front of the stage, and the setup is basically what would be called a Decca setup on the front, with the exception that the center microphone is a stereo pair, not a single microphone, as Decca like to use. And the outriggers, which are these farm microphones, are instead of one microphone, there's two of them. One in this right now, the other one is spaced away, but it's taller, it's higher than the first one. So we have double outriggers. We have double centers, double outriggers. And those play into account the left-handedness and right-handedness of the hall and the way it works and how we hear. Basically, the center pair of these two that are on the pole gives us focus, gives us an ability to adjust balance for strings and for solo instruments that would be without having to put up a microphone in front of the soloist. That's a very much in my lingo a no-no, because a very good sound system is going to identify that single microphone and say, yeah, the sound's coming from the middle of your head. It's not coming from any place that would be real. So, so no mono mics anywhere. They're all stereo, and they're also set up to carry what I call timelines. In other words, the arrival of the sound. Usually in a studio you see microphones practically inside the instruments. Here they are very high. It's the way they should be, because it takes considerable distance for the instrument, the sound to kind of bloom and pull together and be what it is. Get close to the instruments, let's say a timpani, like goes over there on the side, and get close to those and they sound like toys. trumpet loses its zing. That very brilliant thing the trumpet can do is lost if you get close to it. As for the microphones, most of these are legacy microphones. They were made back in the 1960s, the late 1960s, by most of them in fact hand assembled by Dr. Sennheiser, and they would be now a fossil. Probably some legacy behind it, but basically a fossil because the parts inside would not have survived in time. They would have all died and there'd be nobody to know how to fix them. And the reason I have them is because the Sennheiser gave them to me. They dumped out the microphone locker. We don't know how to fix them. You can have them. And so that's where that started. And so what I've done is I've modified them. I've taken out the original analog electronics, which were extremely primitive and not very good, but I've kept the brilliant parts that Sennheiser did do, the FM electronics, which have some very fine virtues. They have a bottom and bass that just doesn't quit. And the diaphragms are now being pulled in by voltages, and so they can be thin and they're very fast. Put both things together, and that gives resolution, and the more resolving power the microphone has, the further away it can be from things and still pull it all together. So it's a fortuitous thing. So anyway, on stage, this is what we have. Back in the back rows, next to where the bass drum is, which right now is way too close to the wall. There's overhead mics that are very tall, and they're set up so that the arrival time of the percussions end up approximately the same as the center microphone, this one that's right next to me over here. Once that happens, we get resolution, we get focus, we get clarity. These are all nice things. The outputs are stereo pairs, and we can follow those over the wires on the floor. They go. Individual microphone preamplifiers. Essentially, each preamp for each stereo pair microphone, and these are all discrete circuit Class A, very much what one would find in a very much coveted phono preamplifier or something like that. They have formidable output capability. They can drive 300 feet of wire easily, no sweat whatsoever. So they're little powerhouses. And notice there's an awful lot of complicated stuff just kind of randomly dangling every which way in them. And that's because each preamplifier has been tuned and matched to the microphones and to the purpose of how the microphones are used. So the accent mics that might be for, say, a harp or for delicate string instruments or maybe a subcontrabass bassoon or something like that, those have a different, a little bit different alignment in frequency response, or EQ, whatever one would call it, than say the front mics, which have a little bit of an accelerated high-end response because they're further away from the instruments, and the attenuation of sound and air affects that. So essentially, each of these little boxes not only calibrates and matches the elements, but it assigns a purpose. And I haven't labeled them yet. Right now, they have their technical labels, and then I was just about to put the labels on them of the instrument that's going to be attached to them. So there we are. One of the nice things about them is I can plug a pair of headphones straight into the preamp, listen to the microphone, and get an idea of what's up. Once in a while, I have to find out where I'm going to place a microphone. Another little toy. I've got lots of toys. This happens to be one. It's a little directional set on a radio antenna, and I can pull this thing out and plug a pair of headphones into it and listen to what the microphone is doing. And it's easy to wave it around, find where an instrument is working best. And that becomes a likely place where I will put a microphone if I have to accent. So there's a lot of toys that I've made myself for this purpose. They're not commercially available. I've never heard of anybody using anything like this. And there are many, many more toys that are like this that also help in making a session.